The pharmacist looked at me over the top of her glasses and said, very quietly, "Are you Lena's mother?" I said yes. She glanced toward the door, then back at me, and lowered her voice even further. "I probably shouldn't say anything, but if I were in your position, I'd want someone to tell me. I didn't sleep that night. My name is Dorothy. I'm 63 years old, and I've lived in the same house in Dayton, Ohio for 31 years. I raised my daughter Lena in that house, in the bedroom with the yellow curtains she picked out herself at age 7, and I thought I knew everything important there was to know about her life. I thought that because she told me things. She called me twice a week. She came home for holidays. We were close, or at least I believed we were. I should back up. Lena is 34. She married a man named Griffin 2 years ago, and I want to be careful about how I say this, because I know I'm her mother and mothers aren't always objective. But from the beginning, something about Griffin made me hold my breath a little. He was charming, very charming, the kind of charming that fills a room and makes everyone laugh at his jokes and lean toward him like sunflowers. My late husband Raymond used to say that the loudest person in the room is usually working the hardest to be noticed. I thought about that often when Griffin was around, but Lena loved him. She was radiant when they were together, and I loved seeing her that way, so I swallowed my unease, and I smiled and I welcomed him into our family. I helped them plan the wedding. I contributed what I could. $12,000 from the savings Raymond had left me, money I'd kept set aside for exactly this kind of milestone. Griffin had made some comment at the time, something about how generous I was, how they really needed the help right now because he was between positions, but a big opportunity was coming. I nodded and wrote the check. The wedding was beautiful. Lena cried at the altar. Griffin cried too, which surprised me and made me feel guilty for my doubts. In the months after, things seemed fine. They moved into a rental in Cincinnati, about an hour and a half from me. Lena kept her job as a dental hygienist. Griffin, I was told, had started his new venture, a consulting business he was building from the ground up. When I asked what kind of consulting, the answer was always slightly different. Technology integration, operational efficiency, business development. I stopped asking. The first time I noticed something was wrong was Thanksgiving, the year after the wedding. Lena looked tired. Not regular tired, the kind of tired that lives behind your eyes and doesn't go away after a good night's sleep. She helped me in the kitchen the way she always had, peeling potatoes and telling me small stories about work, but there were pauses where she used to fill the silence easily. Griffin held court at the dinner table, telling a long story about a client he was about to close that was going to change everything for them. By Christmas, the client still hadn't materialized. I asked her once, gently, if everything was okay. She said, "Of course, Mom." She said Griffin was working really hard, and it was a stressful season for the business, but it was going to pay off. I asked if she needed anything. She laughed a little and said no, everything was fine. I believed her because I wanted to. The pharmacist's name was Agnes. I found that out later. I didn't know her. I'd only been going to that particular Walgreens because mine was being renovated. I'd stopped in to pick up my blood pressure medication, which I've been on since Raymond's death, and I was waiting at the counter when she came out from the back. She recognized me because Lena had apparently listed me as an emergency contact on her pharmacy profile. She had seen Lena come in several times over the past few months, and she said she was worried. She didn't tell me specifics because of privacy. She was very careful about that. But she said what she said. If she were in my position, she'd want someone to tell her. I drove home in a fog. I sat in my kitchen for a long time with my coat still on. I thought about all the things I'd noticed and filed away and told myself didn't mean anything. The way Lena had seemed thinner at Easter, the dark circles, the way she laughed too quickly sometimes, like she was trying to cut off a conversation before it went somewhere. A comment her friend Bridget had made at the wedding shower, something offhand about how Griffin had borrowed money from his previous girlfriend and the situation had ended badly. I'd assumed it was wedding day gossip and let it go. I called Lena that night. She sounded normal, tired but normal. I told her I'd been thinking about her and wanted to come visit that weekend. Just for the day, nothing formal, I'd bring lunch from that Greek place she liked. She hesitated for just a second before she said, "Sure, that would be great." That hesitation kept me up until 2 in the morning. The next morning I called Bridget. Bridget had been Lena's best friend since college, and she didn't hide things the way Lena did. She was quiet for a moment when I asked if she knew anything I should know. Then she said, "I've been wondering if someone was going to call me." She told me that Lena had borrowed money from her, $500, 3 months ago, which Lena said was because of a short-term cash flow problem, and Griffin's payment from a client was delayed. Bridget had given it without hesitation, because that's who Bridget is. But then she'd run into a mutual friend, a woman named Patrice, who'd worked with Griffin at a company years ago, and Patrice had said something that bothered her. She said Griffin had done this before, not just borrowing money, a pattern, getting close to people, building trust, and then slowly pulling resources toward himself until there was nothing left and he moved on. I asked Bridget if she had Patrice's number. Patrice was direct in the way that only people who've been burned can be. She told me she'd dated Griffin for 2 years and by the end she'd lent him. She used the word lent, though her tone made clear she had no illusions, nearly $18,000. He had an answer for everything, always a deal closing next week, always a client who owed him, always a reason the money hadn't come through yet but certainly would. When she finally stopped giving, he became cold and distant, and 3 months later he was gone. She said she knew of at least 2 other women he'd done this to. One of them had taken out a personal loan to give him money for a business investment. She never saw a cent of it back. I sat with that information for 2 days. I didn't sleep well either night. I want to explain why I didn't call Lena immediately, because I think people might wonder about that. The reason is that I knew my daughter, and I knew that if I called her and said I'd been investigating her husband behind her back, the first thing she would do, because she is loyal, because she loves him, because she has built her life around this man, is defend him. She would pull away from me. She would warn him, and whatever window existed would close. So I went to visit on Saturday, and I brought the Greek food and I watched. Their apartment was nicer than I expected from someone with no income, which surprised me until I saw the credit card statements on the kitchen counter. Not snooping, they were just there, fanned out, and the top one showed a balance that made my stomach hurt. Lena was in the kitchen getting plates, and Griffin was being his charming self, pouring sparkling water and asking about my garden, and I thought, you have no idea what I know. After lunch, Griffin left to meet a friend, or said he did, and Lena and I sat on the couch. I turned toward her and I took her hand and I said, "Baby, I need you to tell me the truth, not the version that's okay, the real version." She started to say everything was fine. I held her hand tighter. I said, "I talked to Bridget. I talked to Patrice." The way her face changed, I will carry that image for the rest of my life. It wasn't anger, like I was afraid of. It was relief. Enormous, flooding relief, like someone who had been holding their breath underwater and finally broke the surface. And then she started crying, and she cried for a long time, and what came out of her was the truth she'd been holding by herself for over a year. Griffin hadn't had a client in 8 months. The consulting business had produced almost no income. They were living almost entirely on her dental hygienist's salary, which in Cincinnati is decent, but not enough for 2 people, and a man who spent money the way Griffin did. Dinners out, a gym membership he never used, subscriptions to things she didn't recognize on the bank statements. She had started picking up extra shifts. She had stopped going to the dentist herself because she couldn't justify the copay. She had borrowed from Bridget because 1 month the rent came up short and she was too ashamed to ask me. She said she kept thinking it would turn around, that this week, this month, this deal would be the one, that she was being a good wife by having faith in him. I asked her how much debt they were in. She told me. I won't say the exact number, but it was significant, more than she could dig out from under on her salary alone. I asked if she'd thought about leaving. She was quiet for a very long time. Then she said she had thought about it, but that she was scared, that Griffin had made comments, more than once, about how she wouldn't manage without him, about how her expectations were too high, about how this was just a hard season, and if she were more supportive, they'd get through it faster. She said the comments had made her start to believe, in some deep and terrible way, that this was partly her fault. I held my daughter for a long time. I want to be clear that I did not handle everything that followed perfectly. I am 63 years old and I had just found out my son-in-law was, at minimum, financially irresponsible and, more likely, deliberately exploitative. I had some feelings about that, but I knew that my first job was Lena, not Griffin. What we did first was practical. I helped her call the bank and get her name separated on the accounts she could separate. We called the apartment complex, and she spoke to the manager about her lease, which was fortunately in her name, not both of them, because Griffin had a poor credit history that Lena had been carrying him around, a detail she had not mentioned to me. We then called a family law attorney, because I have learned in 63 years that when things get complicated, you call the people who understand complicated things. The attorney, whose name was Patricia Knowles, was brisk and kind and thorough. She explained Lena's options clearly. Ohio is not a community property state, which the attorney said was relevant to the debt situation. The harder part was confronting Griffin. Lena decided she wanted to be there. I told her she didn't have to be, but she said she did, that she needed to say it herself, that she had spent a year feeling small, and she needed to not feel small anymore. We went together on a Tuesday evening, which is when Griffin was reliably home, because there was a basketball game he never missed. I will not pretend I was entirely calm. I brought with me a folder containing documentation, the credit card statements Lena had gathered, the bank records, a written account from Patrice that Patrice had agreed to provide, notes from our conversation with the attorney. I am my father's daughter in that regard. He always said, if you're going to walk into a room and say something, make sure you can show the receipts. Griffin tried the charm first. He seemed genuinely surprised to see me and gave me a hug and offered coffee, and for a split second I could see exactly why Lena had believed in him. He was very, very good. But Lena sat down across from him at the kitchen table and put the folder between them and said, clearly and without shaking, I know everything, Griffin. I need you to stop talking and listen. That was my daughter. I have never been more proud of anyone in my life. What followed was difficult in the way that truth often is. Griffin went through several phases in the span of about 40 minutes. Surprise, then careful explanation, then something that looked like remorse but had the texture of performance, then anger when he realized the explanations weren't working. He said Lena didn't understand the pressures he was under. He said I was interfering in their marriage. He said Patrice had always had it out for him and was not a reliable source. Lena said, I need you to move out by the end of the month. He said, you're making a mistake. She said, I know you believe that. I want to say something here about Patrice and the other women Griffin had done this to, because one of the things that sat with me heavily was the idea that he would simply walk away from this and find someone else. We considered our options seriously. Patrice was willing to speak to an attorney about her situation. Another woman, Griffin, had taken money from, I'll call her Karen, because she asked for her privacy. Also agreed to consult with a lawyer about whether there were grounds for civil action given the amount of money involved. I am not a lawyer. I don't know what will ultimately come of that, but I know we did not simply let it end with him leaving. We gathered what we had, we put it in front of people whose job it is to evaluate it, and we let them do their work. What happens next is in the hands of people better equipped than I am to handle it. What I know is that we tried. We documented. We didn't pretend it was a private matter that only affected our family, because it wasn't. Griffin moved out 17 days later, the first night Lena spent alone in her apartment. Actually alone, for the first time in 2 years. She called me at 9 o'clock. She wasn't crying. She sounded light, in a way she hadn't sounded in a long time. She said, "Mom, I ate cereal for dinner and watched whatever I wanted on TV and nobody made a comment about it." I laughed so hard I had to put the phone down. It has been 7 months. Lena is not okay in every way. That would be too neat and too fast, and real life is not that clean. She is still working extra shifts to manage the debt. She has been seeing a therapist, which I think is the best decision she's made in 2 years. Some days are harder than others. She called me once at 11 at night because she'd had a dream about Griffin that left her unsettled, and I talked with her until she felt steady. But most days she is more herself than I've seen her in a long time. Last month she repainted her bedroom. She did it herself, a Sunday afternoon with music on and paint on her forearms, and she sent me a photo when she was done. The colour she chose was yellow. I think about Agnes sometimes, the pharmacist I still have never properly met. I don't know what specifically she saw that made her say something to me. I don't know if I would have eventually seen it myself, or how much longer things would have gone on. What I know is that one stranger decided it was worth the risk of saying something, and that changed the direction of things. I have thought many times about what I would have done differently. I might have asked harder questions earlier. I might not have let myself be reassured so easily. I might have paid closer attention to the things I noticed, and then set aside because I didn't want to be the kind of mother who interferes. But here is what I keep coming back to. My daughter is 34 years old, and she is sleeping in a room with yellow walls, and she is building something that belongs entirely to her. That is not a small thing. That is everything. If something has been sitting in your chest about someone you love, something you noticed and then told yourself not to notice, I am asking you, from experience, to pay attention to it. You don't have to do anything dramatic. You don't have to be right. But you owe it to yourself and to them to not look away. That's the thing about being a mother. You never really stop watching the door.